Eleanor Wilson's heart raced as the chapel doors swung open, revealing the sea of faces turned expectantly toward her. The year was 1883, and Alpine, Texas, had never seen a more beautiful bride. Her ivory gown, adorned with delicate lace that her mother had spent months sewing by hand, caught the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. But as she took her first steps down the aisle, she knew something was terribly wrong. Richard Harrington wasn't at the altar. The murmurs started as a gentle ripple, then swelled like a flash flood. Eleanor clutched her bouquet of desert wildflowers tighter, the stems cutting into her palms. She glanced at her father beside her, his weathered face a mask of confusion. "Papa," she whispered. Before he could answer, the church doors burst open again. Eleanor turned, hope flaring in her chest. But it wasn't Richard who entered, it was his cousin Jeremiah, face flushed, hat clutched in his hands. "He's gone," Jeremiah announced, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent church. "Richard left for San Antonio on the morning train. He asked me to give you this." The folded note felt like a burning coal in Eleanor's trembling hands. She unfolded it carefully, conscious of the dozens of eyes watching her every move. "I cannot do this. Forgive me." 5 words. 5 simple words to shatter the future she had planned. The room began to spin, faces blurring together as gasps and whispers erupted around her. Her mother's anguished cry pierced through the chaos. "Eleanor," she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The church walls seemed to close in on her as shame and humiliation burned through her body. She'd been abandoned, left standing in her wedding dress before the entire town. "That yellow-bellied coward," someone muttered from the pews. A strong voice cut through the growing commotion. "I'll marry her." The church fell silent once more. From the back row, a tall figure rose. Eleanor recognized him immediately, Quentin Zachary, the quiet cowboy who'd purchased the struggling ranch bordering her father's property last spring. He'd tipped his hat to her in town a few times, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. He strode forward, boots echoing on the wooden floor, removing his hat as he approached. His dark hair was neatly combed, and though he wore his Sunday best, there was no disguising the strength in his shoulders or the weathered tan of his face. A man who lived in the saddle, not behind a desk like Richard. "Miss Wilson," he said, his voice steady as he stood before her. "If you'll have me, I'm offering you my name." Shocked silence hung in the air. Eleanor stared into the stranger's eyes, a deep blue like the Texas sky after a storm, and saw something unexpected: kindness, and perhaps a touch of something else she couldn't quite name. "Mr. Zachary," her father finally spoke, his voice strained. "This is hardly appropriate, with all due respect, Mr. Wilson," Quentin interrupted, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. "No woman deserves to be humiliated this way. I have a good ranch, a solid home, and I can provide for your daughter. I'm offering her a way to hold her head high when she walks out those doors." Eleanor's thoughts raced. Marriage to a virtual stranger. It was madness. Yet the alternative, facing the town's pity, the whispers, the shame, seemed unbearable. A marriage of convenience with a hard-working cowboy might not be the love match she dreamed of, but it offered something precious. Dignity. She found her voice at last. "Why would you do this for me?" His expression softened slightly. "Because sometimes life doesn't give us what we want, but what we need. I needed land that adjoins mine to make my ranch viable. Your father mentioned you'd be moving to Richard's property after the wedding. This way our lands can remain connected, and you won't have to face tomorrow alone." It was practical, almost businesslike, yet there was a gentleness to his proposal that touched her heart. He wasn't proposing out of love, how could he? They barely knew each other. But he was offering her respect when she needed it most. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye in the church. Her mother sobbed quietly in the front pew. Her younger sisters watched with wide eyes. This wasn't the wedding day she had imagined, but perhaps it could still be a beginning. "Very well, Mr. Zachary," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I accept your offer." A collective gasp swept through the congregation. The preacher, Reverend Johnson, cleared his throat nervously. "Well, I suppose if both parties are willing and Mr. Wilson doesn't object." Her father stepped forward, studying Quentin's face intently. "My daughter deserves happiness, Zachary." "I'll do right by her, sir," Quentin replied. "You have my word." After a long moment, her father nodded. "Then you have my blessing." And so, in a ceremony that lasted barely 10 minutes, Eleanor Wilson became Mrs. Quentin Zachary. She spoke her vows mechanically, feeling as though she were watching the proceedings from somewhere outside her body. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quentin did not kiss her but offered his arm instead. "Shall we?" he asked quietly. With her head held high, Eleanor took his arm and walked back down the aisle, past the astonished faces of friends and neighbors, past her weeping mother and confused younger sisters, past the whispers and the stares. Outside, the Texas sun beat down mercilessly. Quentin's wagon waited where Richard's should have been. He helped her up, treating her gown with careful respect, then climbed up beside her. "Where are we going?" she asked, suddenly aware of the enormity of what she had done. "Home," he said simply, and flicked the reins. The ride to Quentin's ranch was conducted in uncomfortable silence. Eleanor sat rigidly beside him, her wedding gown billowing around her, the bouquet still clutched in her white, knuckled grip. The shock of the morning's events had left her numb, her mind struggling to comprehend the dramatic turn her life had taken in less than an hour. The Lazy Z Ranch came into view as they crested a hill. Eleanor had passed it before but never visited. The modest 2-story house stood surrounded by cottonwood trees, with a barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. It wasn't grand like the home Richard had promised her, but it was well maintained, with a porch that wrapped around the front and smoke rising steadily from the chimney. "My foreman's wife, Mrs. Hernandez, keeps house for me," Quentin explained as he guided the wagon toward the house. "I sent one of my hands ahead to let her know we're coming." As if on cue, a plump woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the house, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Behind her stood a lean Mexican man with a weathered face, presumably Mr. Hernandez. Quentin brought the wagon to a halt and jumped down, then reached up to help Eleanor. His hands were strong and calloused against her waist as he lifted her to the ground. "Mrs. Hernandez, Mr. Hernandez," he said. "This is Eleanor, my wife." The couple exchanged a quick glance that spoke volumes before Mrs. Hernandez stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome, Senora. We had no idea the boss was bringing home a bride today." "It was unexpected," Eleanor managed, forcing a smile. "I've prepared the house as best I could on short notice," Mrs. Hernandez continued. "Come, you must be tired after such a day." Eleanor followed the housekeeper inside, acutely aware of Quentin and Mr. Hernandez speaking in low voices behind her. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, simple, but clean, with solid furniture and the occasional feminine touch that suggested Mrs. Hernandez had done her best to make the bachelor home welcoming. "This will be your room, Senora, Mrs. Hernandez said, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large 4-poster bed and a window overlooking the property. "The boss has been sleeping in the smaller room down the hall since he bought the place." "I see," Eleanor said, suddenly confronting the reality of her situation. She and Quentin had not discussed the practical aspects of their arrangement. Would he expect them to share this room? The thought sent a flush of heat to her cheeks. Mrs. Hernandez seemed to sense her discomfort. "Don't worry, child. The boss is a good man. He will give you time." She patted Eleanor's hand. "Now, let me help you out of this beautiful dress." Later, dressed in a simple day dress that Mrs. Hernandez had found in the trunk of clothes left by the previous owner's wife, Eleanor ventured downstairs. She found Quentin in what appeared to be his study, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Are you settled in?" "Yes, thank you," she replied stiffly. "Mrs. Hernandez has been very kind." An awkward silence fell between them. Eleanor gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind since they left the church. "Mr. Zachary, what happens now?" He set down his glass. "I believe you should call me Quentin, considering the circumstances." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." Eleanor perched on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap as her mother had taught her. Quentin remained standing, as if too restless to sit. "I meant what I said at the church," he began. "This marriage serves a practical purpose for both of us. Your father's land adjoining mine will help make this ranch profitable, and you—" he hesitated. "You deserved better than what happened today." "So this is a business arrangement," Eleanor said, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes," he nodded, then added more gently, "but that doesn't mean it can't be a companionable one. I'll be a respectful husband, Eleanor. I won't make demands of you that you're not ready to meet." The implication was clear. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by a strange mix of emotions she couldn't quite identify. "I'm not a delicate flower, Mr. Quentin," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I was raised on a ranch. I understand what marriage entails." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt your strength, but this isn't how either of us expected to begin a marriage." He picked up his glass again, swirling the amber liquid. "We have time to get to know one another. No need to rush anything else." Eleanor nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whirlwind of the day. "Thank you. You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to discuss how we'll manage the ranch together." As she turned to leave, he called her name softly. "Eleanor," she paused at the doorway. "I'm sorry he hurt you." The simple words, spoken with genuine compassion, nearly broke the dam of emotions she'd been holding back all day. She managed a nod before hurrying upstairs, tears finally spilling down her cheeks as she closed the bedroom door behind her. She cried for the future she had lost, for the humiliation she had endured, and for the uncertainty that now lay ahead. But when her tears finally subsided, Eleanor found herself thinking of the quiet strength in Quentin's eyes and the unexpected kindness of his offer. Perhaps, in time, this strange arrangement might offer something she hadn't considered: a new beginning. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Quentin rose before dawn each morning and returned for supper each evening, dusty and tired from working the ranch. Eleanor, determined to be useful, spent her days learning the household from Mrs. Hernandez and exploring her new home. A week after their impromptu wedding, Eleanor's father arrived with a wagon containing her personal belongings from her family home. "Your mother wanted to come," he explained as Quentin helped unload her trunks, "but she's still adjusting to everything." "I understand," Eleanor said, though the knowledge stung. Her father looked around the property with an appraising eye. "Zachary has done well with this place. Old man Thornton let it fall to pieces before he died." "Quentin works from sunup to sundown," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the defensive note in her voice. Her father studied her face carefully. "Are you happy here, Ellie?" The childhood nickname brought a lump to her throat. "I'm Adjusting too, Papa, he nodded slowly. Richard came back yesterday. Eleanor's heart stuttered in her chest. What? Said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd panicked. Her father's expression darkened. I told him he was too late. That my daughter was married to a better man than he could ever hope to be. A complicated mix of emotions washed over Eleanor: vindication, relief, and a lingering ache for what might have been. Thank you, Papa, she said quietly. You know, he said, glancing toward where Quentin was directing the placement of her belongings, your mother and I didn't love each other when we married. That came later with time and respect. He squeezed her hand. Give him a chance, Ellie. After her father left, Eleanor found herself reflecting on his words as she unpacked her belongings. The bedroom felt more like her own space now, with her books on the shelf and her mother's quilt on the bed. She had just hung the last of her dresses in the wardrobe when a knock came at the door. Come in, she called, expecting Mrs. Hernandez. Instead, Quentin stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Your father mentioned you're an excellent horsewoman, he said without preamble. I thought you might like to see the rest of the property. The invitation surprised her. I'd like that very much. He nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. I'll saddle a horse for you. Half an hour later, Eleanor was mounted on a gentle mare named Daisy, riding alongside Quentin as he showed her the boundaries of the Lazy Z. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, highlighting the rugged beauty of the Davis Mountains in the distance. Your father's land begins just beyond that line of mesquites, Quentin explained, pointing to a natural boundary. With both properties combined, we'll have enough grazing land to increase the herd significantly. You've thought this through carefully, Eleanor observed. He nodded. I've been saving to buy land like this since I was 16. Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman, put aside every penny I could. There was quiet pride in his voice. When old man Thornton's place came up for sale, I knew it was my chance. And now you've married into more land, she said, unable to keep a trace of bitterness from her voice. Quentin reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her directly. I would have found another way to expand if I had to, Eleanor. I didn't marry you for your father's property. Then why did you? The question had been burning inside her for days. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze traveling across the rolling landscape. When I was 12, I watched my mother get left by my father, he finally said. He just rode off one day, never came back. I saw what it did to her, not just the hardship, but the shame of being abandoned. His eyes met hers. No one deserves that feeling. The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep within her. For the first time since their wedding, Eleanor saw Quentin not as the stranger who had offered her an escape, but as a man with his own past, his own wounds. I'm sorry about your father, she said softly. He shrugged, but she could see the old hurt in his eyes. It was a long time ago. My mother remarried eventually a good man who taught me ranching. His expression lightened. Come on, there's something I want to show you. He led her to a rise overlooking a small valley where a creek wound through a stand of cottonwoods. Wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of yellow and purple. It's beautiful, Eleanor breathed. I thought this might be a good spot for a new house someday, Quentin said, his voice casual. When the ranch is turning a profit. The implication that he was planning for their future together hung in the air between them. Eleanor studied his profile against the setting sun, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. He was handsome in a rugged way, she realized, not with Richard's polished good looks, but with a natural strength that suited this wild country. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself with her sincerity. A small smile touched his lips, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. We should head back before we lose the light. As they rode home side by side, Eleanor felt something shift between them, not love, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. That night at supper, the silence between them was more comfortable than it had been before. Eleanor found herself watching Quentin's hands as he ate, strong, capable hands that spoke of years of hard work. She wondered what they would feel like against her skin, then blushed at the direction of her thoughts. "I thought I might ride into town tomorrow," she said, breaking the silence. "There are a few things I need from the mercantile," Quentin nodded. "I'll have Pedro drive you in the wagon." "I'd prefer to ride," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm perfectly capable." He studied her for a moment, then nodded again. "Of course. Just be back before dark." "The trail can be tricky in low light." "I know these lands as well as you do, Quentin," she reminded him. "I grew up here." A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "So you did. My apologies." The next morning, Eleanor rode into Alpine with a sense of trepidation. This would be her first appearance in town since the disastrous wedding day. She had chosen her newest day dress and arranged her hair carefully, determined to face the townsfolk with dignity. As expected, her entrance into the mercantile caused a stir of whispers and curious glances. Mrs. Potter, the owner's wife, hurried forward with an overly bright smile. "Mrs. Zachary, how lovely to see you. How are you settling in?" Eleanor forced a smile. "Quite well, thank you, Mrs. Potter." "Such a surprise, your wedding," the woman continued, her eyes alight with barely concealed curiosity. "No one had any idea that you and Mr. Zachary were acquainted." "Life is full of surprises," Eleanor replied evenly. "I'll need flour, sugar, and coffee, please." As Mrs. Potter gathered her items, Eleanor browsed the store, painfully aware of the whispers around her. She was examining a bolt of calico when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Eleanor." She turned slowly, her heart thudding against her ribs. Richard Harrington stood before her, hat in hand, his handsome face a mask of regret. "What do you want, Richard?" she asked quietly. "To apologize," he said, lowering his voice. "What I did was unforgivable. I panicked. The responsibility of marriage, of building a life together, I wasn't ready." He stepped closer. "But I've realized my mistake. I love you, Eleanor, I always have." Once those words would have meant everything to her. Now they rang hollow. "You're too late," she said simply. "I'm married." "To a man you barely know," Richard pressed. "A rough cowboy with a struggling ranch." "Eleanor, be reasonable. We could still find a way. Is there a problem here?" Eleanor hadn't heard Quentin enter the store. He stood a few feet away, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as they fixed on Richard. "This is a private conversation," Richard said stiffly. "Nothing concerning my wife is private to me," Quentin replied, moving to stand beside Eleanor. His hand came to rest at the small of her back, a gesture of possession that surprised her with its warmth. Richard's face flushed. "You took advantage of a vulnerable woman, Zachary." "And you abandoned a bride at the altar," Quentin countered, his voice dangerously soft. "I suggest you move along now." For a tense moment, Eleanor thought Richard might argue further, but something in Quentin's steady gaze made him think better of it. "This isn't over," Richard muttered, turning away. "Yes, it is," Eleanor called after him, her voice stronger than she expected. Several customers turned to stare. "Goodbye, Richard." When he had gone, Eleanor looked up at Quentin. "What are you doing in town? I thought you were working the north pasture today." "Finished early," he said, his hand still warm against her back. "Thought you might appreciate some company on the ride home." The concern in his eyes touched her unexpectedly. "Thank you," she said softly. They completed her shopping in companionable silence, then rode out of town together. Eleanor was acutely conscious of the picture they made, the new Mrs. Zachary and her husband, out together for all to see. It was a statement, she realized, one that Quentin had deliberately made. "You didn't have to do that," she said when they were out of town. "Do what?" he asked, though she suspected he knew exactly what she meant. "Come to my rescue, make it clear to everyone that we're together." Quentin was quiet for a moment. "You're my wife, Eleanor. Maybe not in all the ways that usually means, but in the eyes of the law and the town, you're Mrs. Zachary now." He glanced at her. "Besides, Harrington needs to understand that he can't just change his mind and expect you to come running back." "I wouldn't," she said firmly. "Even if you and I weren't married." He smiled slightly. "I believe you." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats soothing in the afternoon quiet. "When I was 16, Eleanor said suddenly, "I fell from my horse and broke my arm. Richard was there. He rode for the doctor, then sat with me while they set the bone." She stared at the horizon. "I thought that meant he loved me, that he'd always be there when I needed him." "Some men are only brave when it's easy," Quentin observed. "And you?" she asked, glancing at his profile. "Are you brave when it's hard?" He considered her question seriously. "I try to be. Haven't always succeeded." His honesty impressed her. Richard would have boasted, claiming unfailing courage. Quentin's admission of imperfection felt refreshingly real. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached the ranch. "For what?" "For being there. For letting me handle Richard myself until I needed help." She smiled slightly. "For not treating me like I'm made of glass." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I have a feeling you're made of much stronger stuff than that, Eleanor Zachary." The way he said her married name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. For the first time since their hasty wedding, Eleanor found herself wondering what it might be like to truly be Quentin's wife in every sense of the word. That night, she lay awake in her bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Quentin's room was just down the hall, separated from hers by his study. Was he awake too? Was he thinking of her? The questions circled in her mind until sleep finally claimed her. The next morning, Eleanor woke with a sense of purpose. If this was to be her life now wife to Quentin Zachary, mistress of the Lazy Z, then she would embrace it fully. No more hiding in the house, no more treating their arrangement as temporary. At breakfast, she announced, "I'd like to learn more about the ranch operations." Quentin looked up from his coffee, surprise evident on his face. "You would?" "Yes," she said firmly. "If we're to be partners in this venture, I should understand all aspects of it." A slow smile spread across his face. "Partners, huh? Isn't that what you intended when you proposed this arrangement?" she challenged. "It is," he confirmed. "Just didn't expect you to come around to the idea so quickly." Eleanor raised her chin. "I'm adaptable, so I see." He considered for a moment. "We're branding calves today. It's dusty, dirty work." "I'll change into something suitable," she replied, refusing to be deterred. An hour later, dressed in the most practical clothes she owned, a simple skirt and blouse she'd worn for ranch chores at home, Eleanor joined Quentin and his men in the corral. The cowhands exchanged curious glances, clearly surprised by her presence. "Mrs. Zachary will be joining us today," Quentin announced matter-of-factly. "She grew up on a ranch and knows her way around cattle." The men nodded respectfully, though Eleanor could sense their skepticism. She would have to prove herself. The work was indeed dirty and exhausting. Eleanor helped herd the calves into the smaller corral, holding them still while the men applied the Lazy Z brand. She didn't flinch at their bawling or at the smell of singed hair. By midday, she was sweaty, dusty, and had earned begrudging respect from the hands. "You handle yourself well around cattle, Mrs. Zachary," Pedro Hernandez commented during a water break. "Thank you," she said, wiping her brow with her sleeve. "My father believed daughters should be as capable as sons." "A wise man," Quentin remarked, approaching with his own dipper of water. His shirt was dust-covered, His face streaked with sweat, but his eyes shone with something that might have been admiration as he looked at her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her arms ached from wrestling calves. "This isn't my first branding." "No, but it's your first as mistress of the Lazy Z," he said quietly. "The men are impressed." Pride warmed her chest. "Good." They worked through the afternoon, finishing just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Eleanor's muscles protested as she helped clean and store the equipment, but she felt a sense of satisfaction she hadn't experienced since before her ill-fated wedding day. "You should take a hot bath," Quentin suggested as they walked back to the house. "It'll help with the soreness." Eleanor nodded gratefully. "That sounds heavenly." Mrs. Hernandez had supper waiting and bath water heating when they returned. After scrubbing away the day's dirt and changing into a clean dress, Eleanor felt renewed. She found Quentin in the dining room, freshly bathed himself, his damp hair combed back from his forehead. "You surprised me today," he said as Mrs. Hernandez served their meal. "How so?" "Most women from town would have given up after the first hour." He cut into his steak. "You worked harder than some men I've hired." "I told you I'm not delicate," she reminded him. "And I'm not from town, not really. The Wilson Ranch has been my home my whole life." "You miss it," he observed. She considered his words. "Parts of it. Mostly I miss feeling useful, having a purpose." "You have purpose here," he said simply. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, a comfortable silence between them, Eleanor reflected on the day. For the first time since her wedding, she hadn't thought about Richard or the humiliation of being abandoned. Instead, she'd focused on building something new. "A penny for your thoughts," Quentin said, his voice low in the darkness. "I was thinking that I might be able to make a life here," she admitted. "A good one." In the faint light from the window, she saw him smile. "I think so too." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Eleanor divided her time between the house and the ranch operations, learning the business side from Quentin, and discovering that she had a talent for record-keeping and planning that complemented his practical experience. They made a good team, each bringing different strengths to their partnership. June brought scorching heat to the Texas plains. The cattle grew restless, seeking what little shade they could find, and the men worked shorter days to avoid the worst of the afternoon sun. After a particularly hot day, Quentin surprised Eleanor with an invitation. "There's a swimming hole about a mile upstream," he said as they finished supper. "The water's cool, even in this heat. Thought you might like to see it." The idea of cool water against her skin was too tempting to resist. Eleanor changed into an old dress. She wouldn't mind getting wet and followed Quentin on horseback to a secluded spot where the creek widened into a deep pool, shaded by ancient cottonwoods. "It's beautiful," she breathed, dismounting eagerly. "Found it my first week here," he said, tethering their horses to a low branch. "Come in only at dusk or dawn when it's private." Eleanor hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. They would be swimming together, something she'd never done with a man, not even Richard during their lengthy courtship. Sensing her uncertainty, Quentin added, "I can wait on the bank if you prefer to swim alone first." "No," she said, making up her mind. "It's fine. We're married after all." She slipped off her shoes and stockings, keenly aware of his eyes on her as she waded into the water in her dress. The cool shock against her overheated skin made her gasp with pleasure. She moved deeper until the water reached her waist, then her shoulders, her dress billowing around her. Quentin removed his boots and shirt before joining her, his bare chest golden in the evening light. Eleanor tried not to stare at the defined muscles of his torso, or the scattering of dark hair that narrowed down his stomach and disappeared into his trousers. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before, not the hard-working rancher or the respectful husband, but a man, strong and vital. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said, ducking his head under the water and emerging with his hair slicked back. "Heavenly," she agreed, floating on her back. The water supported her weight, her hair spreading around her like seaweed. "We should do this every day until the heat breaks," he chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "Might be hard to get any work done that way." They swam until the last light faded from the sky, talking easily about the ranch, their childhoods, their hopes for the property. When they finally emerged, Eleanor's wet dress clung to her body in a way that made her suddenly self-conscious. Quentin, ever observant, handed her his dry shirt. "Here," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "Put this on over your dress for the ride home." His thoughtfulness touched her. The shirt smelled of him, leather and sage, and something uniquely Quentin. She found herself breathing it in as they rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. That night, lying in her bed, Eleanor found her thoughts returning to the image of Quentin in the water, droplets glistening on his skin in the fading light. Something was changing between them, something that both excited and frightened her. July brought news that a railroad spur line would be built to Alpine, promising easier access to markets for their cattle. Quentin and Eleanor rode into town together to attend the town meeting about the development. "This could change everything for the Lazy Z," Quentin explained as they tied their horses outside the town hall. "We could ship directly to Chicago, get better prices." The meeting room was crowded with ranchers and townspeople when they arrived. Eleanor felt the stares as they entered, but held her head high as Quentin guided her to seats near the front. The railroad representative had just begun his presentation when Richard Harrington entered with his father, the bank president. Eleanor stiffened as they took seats across the aisle. Richard's eyes found hers immediately, his gaze intense. "Ignore him," Quentin murmured, his hand covering hers briefly. The meeting proceeded, with details about the railroad's timeline and the potential economic benefits for Alpine. When the floor opened for questions, Harrington stood first. "My bank is prepared to offer loans to help ranchers upgrade their operations in preparation for the railroad's arrival," he announced. "We anticipate increased demand once shipping becomes more economical." Quentin leaned forward with interest. Eleanor knew they had been discussing expanding the herd, but were constrained by limited capital. After the meeting, Quentin approached Harrington while Eleanor spoke with the mayor's wife. She was acutely aware of Richard hovering nearby, clearly waiting for an opportunity to speak with her. When the mayor's wife excused herself, he made his move. "You look well, Eleanor," he said, stepping closer than propriety allowed. "Marriage agrees with you." "It does," she replied coolly. "If you'll excuse me, I should join my husband." Richard caught her arm as she turned to leave. "I made a mistake, Eleanor, the biggest of my life." His voice dropped lower. "Tell me you don't think about what might have been. Tell me you love him." The question caught her off guard. Did she love Quentin? Their relationship had evolved from awkward strangers to respectful partners, even friends. She enjoyed his company, admired his work ethic, found herself watching for his smile. But love, before she could formulate a response, Quentin appeared at her side. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp as they noted Richard's hand on her arm. Richard released her immediately. "Just catching up with an old friend." "How fortunate for you that my wife is so forgiving," Quentin said pleasantly, though there was steel beneath his words. "Eleanor, your father just arrived. He's looking for you." "Excuse me," she said to Richard, relieved for the interruption. As Quentin guided her away, his hand protective at the small of her back, Eleanor found herself leaning into his touch. Whatever she felt for her husband, it was growing stronger by the day. Later that evening, as they rode home beneath a sky ablaze with stars, Eleanor broke the comfortable silence. "Your meeting with Mr. Harrington went well," Quentin nodded. "He's offering favorable terms on a loan. We could increase the herd by 50 head before winter." "That's wonderful news," she said sincerely. He glanced at her. "It's a risk, if beef prices fall or if we lose too many to disease or harsh weather." "We'll face that together if it happens," she assured him. "I believe in what we're building, Quentin." The conviction in her voice seemed to please him. They rode in silence for a while longer before he spoke again. "Harrington's son seemed eager to speak with you." Eleanor hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "He said he regrets what he did." Quentin's jaw tightened. "I imagine he does, now that he sees you thriving without him." "I'm not sure I would call it thriving," she said carefully, "but I'm content, just content." There was something vulnerable in his question that made her heart beat faster. "For now," she answered honestly. "It's more than I expected 3 months ago." He nodded slowly, accepting her answer without pushing for more. That was one of the things she had come to appreciate about Quentin. He never demanded what she wasn't ready to give. August arrived with thunderstorms that broke the heat but brought new challenges. Flash floods threatened the lower pastures, forcing them to move cattle to higher ground in drenching rain. Eleanor worked alongside the men, her skirts muddied to the knees as she helped herd the frightened animals. One particularly violent storm hit just before dusk. Eleanor and Quentin were returning from checking the eastern fences when the sky darkened ominously. "We need to make for the line shack," Quentin called over the rising wind. "We won't make it home before this breaks." They urged their horses to a gallop, racing the storm to the small cabin that provided shelter for hands working distant parts of the ranch. They reached it just as the first massive drops began to fall, quickly unsaddling their horses and getting them under the crude lean-to attached to the shack. Inside, the one-room shelter was basic but dry. Quentin quickly lit the lantern and stoked a fire in the small stove while Eleanor wrung water from her hair and skirts. "There should be some coffee and beans in the supplies," he said, gesturing to a shelf, "and some blankets in that trunk. It gets cold in here once the sun goes down." The storm intensified, rain hammering the roof and wind howling around the eaves. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making Eleanor jump despite herself. "Not fond of storms?" Quentin asked, noticing her reaction. She shook her head. "Not since I was caught in one as a child. Got separated from my father and spent hours alone in weather like this before he found me." Understanding softened his expression. "You're safe now." The simple assurance comforted her more than elaborate promises would have. Eleanor busied herself preparing a simple meal from the shack's provisions while Quentin checked that the horses were secure. When he returned, rain streaming from his hat and coat, Eleanor had coffee brewing and beans warming on the stove. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the storm's fury outside. "Looks like we'll be here for the night," Quentin observed, glancing through the window at the sheets of rain illuminated by lightning flashes. "You take the cot. I'll make do on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor said practically. "That floor is hard, packed dirt, probably damp from the rain. The cot's big enough for both of us if we're careful." He looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" "We're married, Quentin," she reminded him, though her heart beat a little faster at her own boldness. "And it's just sleeping." He nodded slowly. "All right." After they'd cleaned up their simple meal, the awkwardness Eleanor had feared didn't materialize. Instead, they talked easily by lantern light, Quentin telling stories of cattle drives and Eleanor sharing memories of growing up on her father's ranch. "I always wanted to see more of the country," she admitted. San Francisco, New Orleans, even New York. Maybe someday you will, he said. When the railroad comes, travel will be easier. Would you come with me? She asked, watching his face in the golden light. He considered the question seriously. If you wanted me to. I would, she said softly, surprising herself with the realization. The lantern oil eventually ran low and they prepared for sleep. Eleanor removed her outer garments, keeping her chemise and petticoat, while Quentin stripped to his underclothes. They settled on the narrow cot, backs to each other, a careful space between them. Despite the storm and the unfamiliar surroundings, Eleanor found herself relaxing in the warmth of Quentin's presence. His steady breathing was comforting in the darkness. "Eleanor," he murmured, just as she was drifting off. I'm glad you're here, not just tonight, but with me." At the Lazy Z. His words wrapped around her heart. "I'm glad too," she whispered. Sometime in the night, the storm abated and Eleanor woke to find herself curled against Quentin's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She should have moved away, maintained the careful distance they'd established, but in the peaceful darkness, she allowed herself to remain where she was, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world and puddles that reflected the brilliant blue sky. They rode home in comfortable silence, something new and fragile growing between them. September brought the first hint of autumn to the air and preparations for the fall roundup. The Lazy Z would be driving 100 head to the railroad town of Marfa, where the nearest line currently ended. It would be their first major sale since Quentin had expanded the herd. "I want to come with you," Eleanor announced at breakfast. A week before the drive was set to begin, Quentin looked up from the list he was reviewing. "On the cattle drive. Eleanor, it's 10 days of hard riding, sleeping on the ground, eating dust." "I know what a cattle drive involves," she said firmly. "I've been helping manage this ranch for 4 months. I deserve to see the sale through." He studied her face, clearly weighing her determination against his concerns. "The men won't like it." "They'll accept it because you'll tell them to," she countered. "Besides, I can cook better than any of them. Think of it as bringing along a chuck wagon cook who can also ride drag if needed." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "You've thought this through?" "I have," she confirmed. "This is our future, Quentin, our herd, our profits. I want to be part of it." "Our future," he repeated softly, something warming in his eyes. "All right, but you follow my lead out there. The trail can be dangerous." "Agreed," she said, triumph surging through her. The next week was a flurry of preparations. Eleanor worked with Mrs. Hernandez to prepare supplies for the chuck wagon while Quentin and the hands selected the cattle and plotted their route. When the day of departure arrived, Eleanor was ready, dressed in split riding skirts that had scandalized Mrs. Hernandez, but would allow her to ride astride comfortably for days. The cattle drive was every bit as grueling as Quentin had warned. Days began before dawn and ended well after dusk. Dust coated everything, water was often scarce, and every muscle in Eleanor's body ached from hours in the saddle. But there was beauty too, brilliant sunsets painting the sky in impossible colors, the rhythm of the herd moving across the landscape. Nights spent around the campfire with the hands sharing stories and songs. On the 4th night, after the men had turned in, Eleanor sat by the dying fire gazing up at the vast canopy of stars. Quentin joined her, offering a cup of coffee laced with whiskey. "For the chill," he explained. She accepted gratefully, the liquor warming her from the inside as they sat in companionable silence. "The men have stopped looking at me like I'm going to break," she observed. "I think I've finally earned their respect." "You had mine already," Quentin said quietly. Eleanor glanced at him, his profile strong against the glow of the embers. "When did that happen?" He considered the question. "Maybe the day you joined the branding, or perhaps earlier when you faced down Richard Harrington in the Mercantile." He took a sip of his coffee. "Or possibly the moment you said I do to a stranger rather than be defeated by humiliation." His words touched her deeply. "I've never regretted it, you know," she said softly. "Saying yes to you that day." His eyes found hers, intense in the firelight. "Neither have I." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Eleanor found herself leaning toward him almost unconsciously. The crack of a branch breaking in the darkness shattered the moment. Quentin was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. "Just me, boss," called Pedro Hernandez's voice. "Checking the horses. Thought I heard something prowling around." "I'll help you look," Quentin replied, giving Eleanor an apologetic glance. "You should get some sleep. Dawn comes early." She nodded, the moment lost but not forgotten. As she settled into her bedroll, Eleanor replayed the look in Quentin's eyes and wondered what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. The rest of the drive passed without incident. When they reached Marfa, Quentin negotiated an excellent price for their cattle, better than they had hoped. That night, he took Eleanor to dinner at the hotel, a celebration of their successful venture. "To the first of many profitable drives for the Lazy Z," he toasted, raising his glass to hers. "And to partnerships that work," she added, holding his gaze. After dinner, they walked back to their hotel in the cool evening air. Unlike the trail, propriety demanded separate rooms in town, though Eleanor found herself wishing it were otherwise. At her door, Quentin paused. "Thank you for insisting on coming," he said. "You were right, you deserve to see it through." "Thank you for letting me prove myself," she replied. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Eleanor." The touch of his lips against her skin lingered long after he'd gone to his own room. Eleanor pressed her fingers to the spot, a smile playing at her lips as she realized how much things had changed between them. They returned to the Lazy Z triumphant, with plans to expand further in the spring. October brought cooler weather and the harvest from Eleanor's kitchen garden, which she had established shortly after arriving at the ranch. She found satisfaction in putting up preserves for the winter and making the house truly her own. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a rider approached. Eleanor recognized her father's posture before she could make out his face. "Papa," she called, rising to greet him. "What brings you here?" Her father dismounted stiffly, his expression grave. "It's your mother, Ellie. She's taken ill with pneumonia, the doctor says." He faltered. "He says we should prepare ourselves." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Despite their sometimes strained relationship, she loved her mother deeply. "I'll pack immediately," she said, turning toward the house. "I'll come with you," Quentin said without hesitation. Within the hour, they were riding for the Wilson ranch, pushing their horses as fast as was safe in the fading light. They arrived to find the house quiet, a lantern burning in her mother's bedroom window. "She's been asking for you," her father said as they entered. Eleanor hurried upstairs to find her mother pale and struggling for breath, her younger sisters keeping vigil at her bedside. When she saw Eleanor, a weak smile touched her lips. "My girl," she whispered. "You came." "Of course I came," Eleanor said, taking her mother's hand. "Save your strength now. I'm here." Through the long night, Eleanor sat with her mother while Quentin and her father talked quietly downstairs. Near dawn, her mother's fever broke the crisis, passing as suddenly as it had come. "The doctor says she's turned the corner," her father announced after examining her. "With proper care, she should recover." Relief washed over Eleanor. She found Quentin in the kitchen, making coffee for everyone who had kept the vigil. "She's going to be all right," she told him. exhaustion and joy making her voice unsteady. He set down the coffee pot and crossed to her in 2 strides, enfolding her in his arms without hesitation. Eleanor melted against him, accepting the comfort of his strength after the long, frightening night. "Thank God," he murmured against her hair. "I was worried for you. Thank you for coming with me," she said into his shirt, "for being here." He held her a moment longer before releasing her, though his hands remained on her shoulders. "Where else would I be when you needed me?" The simple statement, spoken so matter-of-factly, pierced Eleanor's heart. This, she realized, was what had been missing with Richard, this unwavering support, this absolute certainty that she could count on him. They stayed at the Wilson ranch for a week, until her mother was well enough to sit up and take solid food again. During that time, Eleanor watched Quentin with new eyes, saw how he pitched in with ranch chores without being asked, how he discussed cattle prices with her father, how he patiently taught her youngest sister to play checkers. On their last evening, as they prepared to return to the Lazy Z the next day, Eleanor's mother asked to speak with her privately. "You've changed," her mother observed when they were alone. "There's a confidence in you I've never seen before." Eleanor smiled. "Running a ranch will do that, I suppose. It's more than that." Her mother studied her face. "It's him, isn't it? Your cowboy, Quentin," Eleanor said softly. "Yes, I think it is. When you married him, I thought you were making another mistake, rushing from one man to another without thinking." Her mother took her hand. "I was wrong. I see how he looks at you and how you look at him." "How do I look at him?" Eleanor asked, curious about what her mother saw. "Like he's the son and you've been cold for a very long time," her mother said simply. "You love him." The words settled into Eleanor's heart with the ring of truth. "I do," she whispered, the realization both frightening and exhilarating. "I love him." "Have you told him?" Eleanor shook her head. "Our marriage didn't begin that way. We've been careful with each other." "Perhaps too careful," her mother suggested. "Life is shorter than we think, Eleanor. Don't waste time being afraid to speak your heart." The advice stayed with Eleanor as they rode back to the Lazy Z the next day. She watched Quentin as they traveled, the confident way he sat his horse, the kindness in his interactions with others, the quiet strength that had become her anchor. Yes, she loved him. The question now was whether he felt the same, and what she would do about it if he did. They arrived home as the sun was setting, painting the modest house in golden light. Mrs. Hernandez had prepared a welcome home supper and had the house warm and inviting after their absence. After the meal, Eleanor found herself restless, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She stepped outside to the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the October chill. Quentin joined her a few minutes later, offering a cup of hot cider. "Everything all right? Just thinking," she said, accepting the cider gratefully. "About your mother, partly." She took a deep breath. "Quentin, there's something I need to say." He turned to face her fully, his expression open. "I'm listening." Eleanor gathered her courage. "When we married, it was for practical reasons, a way for me to save face, a way for you to connect our properties." "Yes," he agreed carefully. "But things have changed," she continued. "At least for me." Her heart pounded so hard she was sure he must hear it. "I've grown to care for you deeply, more than I ever thought possible when I said those vows." Quentin was very still, his eyes never leaving her face. "Eleanor, please let me finish," she said quickly. "I understand if you don't feel the same way. Our arrangement can continue as it has been if that's what you want. But I needed you to know that for me, it's no longer just an arrangement." She took a shaky breath. "I love you, Quentin." The words hung in the cool evening air between them. For a long, terrible moment, he said nothing, and Eleanor's heart began to sink. Then he set down his cup and closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I've been trying to find the courage to tell you the same thing for weeks," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you that day at the swimming hole when you laughed like you hadn't a care in the world. Or maybe it was during the storm when I woke up with you in my arms and wished I never had to let you go." Joy bubbled up inside her. "You love me, with everything I am," he confirmed. "I never expected it, never planned for it, but somewhere along the way you became essential to me. The center of my world." His hands framed her face gently. "I love you, Eleanor Zachary, not for your father's land or for appearance's sake, but for your strength, your kindness, your stubborn determination to make a place for yourself here." Eleanor felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. "I was so afraid you wouldn't feel the same." "How could I not?" he asked softly. "You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Eleanor had been waiting for this moment longer than she'd admitted to herself. She rose on her tiptoes to meet him, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was tender at first, a gentle exploration, but quickly deepened as months of unspoken longing found expression. Eleanor wound her arms around his neck, pressing herself closer as his hand slipped to her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day at the swimming hole. Why didn't you?" she asked, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "I wanted to be sure you were ready," he said simply. "That you wanted me, not just the security I could provide." His consideration touched her deeply. "I want you," she assured him. "Only you." He kissed her again, more urgently this time, and Eleanor responded with equal passion. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with desire. "Eleanor," he said hoarsely, "if we don't stop now, I'm not sure I'll be able to." She took his hand and led him toward the door. "Then don't stop." That night, Eleanor and Quentin truly became husband and wife in every sense. Their coming together was tender and passionate, a culmination of the trust and love that had grown between them over the months since their hasty wedding. Afterward, lying in his arms in what would now be their shared bedroom, Eleanor traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I never expected to find this," she admitted. "When Richard left me at the altar, I thought my chance for happiness was over. And I never expected to stand up in that church," he said, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "But something made me do it. Providence, maybe, or destiny," she suggested. "Whatever it was, I'm grateful," he murmured, pulling her closer. As winter settled over the Texas plains, the Lazy Z prospered. Quentin and Eleanor worked side by side, equal partners in the ranch and in life. News came that the railroad spur to Alpine would be completed by summer, promising even better markets for their growing herd. Eleanor's family visited for Christmas, her mother fully recovered and delighted to see her daughter's happiness. Even Richard Harrington, when they encountered him in town, could only nod stiffly in acknowledgement of what he had lost. In January, as they lay together in the warmth of their bed while a rare snow fell outside, Eleanor shared news that made Quentin's face light up with joy. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "You're sure?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," she said, smiling at his wonder. "By harvest time we'll be 3 instead of 2. He gathered her close, his kiss reverent. "I never thought I could be this happy." "Nor I," she admitted. "And to think it all began with the worst day of my life." "Which became the best day of mine," he murmured against her hair. Their son, Thomas James Zachary, was born on a crisp September day in 1884, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As Eleanor watched Quentin cradle their child with gentle hands, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in little more than a year. From abandoned bride to beloved wife and mother, From a marriage of convenience to a union of deep and abiding love, it was a journey she could never have imagined when she stood humiliated at the altar that fateful day. 2 years later, on their third wedding anniversary, Quentin took Eleanor to the rise overlooking the creek where he had once spoken of building a new house. There, nestled among the cottonwoods, stood a nearly completed home larger and more comfortable than the original ranch house, with wide windows to catch the breeze and a deep porch for watching sunsets. "Your anniversary gift," he said, his arm around her waist as they surveyed what would soon be their new home. "A place for our family to grow." Eleanor leaned against him, their son playing at their feet and their second child growing beneath her heart. "It's perfect," she said. "Just like the man who built it." "Hardly perfect," he chuckled, "but I try to be worthy of what you've given me." "And what's that?" she asked, turning in his arms. "Everything," he said simply. "A home, a family, a purpose." He kissed her gently. "Love." Eleanor smiled up at the man who had offered his name to a stranger and his heart to the woman she became. "That day in the church when you stood up for me," she said, "did you have any idea what would come of it?" "Not a clue," he admitted with a grin. "I just knew I couldn't let you stand there alone." "My hero," she said, only half teasing. "Always," he promised, and sealed the vow with a kiss. As the years passed, the Lazy Z became one of the most prosperous ranches in the county. Eleanor and Quentin welcomed 2 more children, a daughter, Sarah, and another son, Michael, and watched with pride as Thomas grew into a young man eager to learn the ranching business from his father. The railroad brought prosperity to Alpine, and with it came new opportunities. Quentin and Eleanor invested in businesses in town, becoming respected community leaders. They traveled too to San Francisco, New Orleans, and even New York, just as Eleanor had once dreamed. But no matter how far they roamed, they always returned to the Lazy Z, to the home they had built together, to the life that had begun with an impulsive act of kindness and blossomed into enduring love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Eleanor found Quentin standing alone on the porch of their home, gazing out at the land they had nurtured together. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "How differently our lives might have turned out," he said, squeezing her fingers. "If Richard Harrington had been a braver man, if I had kept my seat in that church. We might never have known what we could be together," she mused. "The thought terrifies me," he admitted, turning to face her. His hair was silver now at the temples, lines of laughter etched around his eyes, but to Eleanor, he was as handsome as the day he had stood up in that church. 25 years, and I love you more today than I did yesterday." "And I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today," she replied, the words a ritual between them now. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Eleanor Zachary stood in the circle of her husband's arms and gave thanks for the day she was abandoned at the altar, for it had led her to the great love of her life, a love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. In the distance, their grandchildren's laughter rang out, a promise of generations to come who would learn the story of a desperate bride, a gallant cowboy, and the extraordinary life they built together, proof that sometimes the end of one dream can lead to the beginning of something far more beautiful than either could have imagined.